Okay, this is an interesting experience. Okay, Kim.
Okay, I hear you. You'll tell me when to go or I'll figure it out, okay?
Okay, so I don't know if you heard that somebody said that the host is disabled to do screen share, so maybe that was the problem.
No, but it's okay.
Okay, so in that case, I'm just closing here the door and we're starting.
Okay.
Because I was about to call my father. It's his computer after all. Okay, so we're starting. Hi everybody. Sorry for these problems, and we are starting now. This is Jewish life in Iraq. Please move the slide.
Okay.
Okay, so Iraq, usually I move my hands a lot and now you won't see me, so it's weird for me, but you can see where Iraq is located. We are in the Middle East, and Iraq is there in red, and you can see it has all the countries that it's bordering. I will be showing them to you in a second. You can move to the next slide, Kim.
I'm trying.
Okay, you can just move your arrow to the right.
It's not working.
Your right
It's
arrow.
not working.
Oh, okay, fine.
Maybe it's because I haven't. I'll get there.
Yeah. And if you do left click on your mouse.
Okay. I'm in an apple, but go on.
Okay, but we're not in present mode though now. Can you see it up at the top? Yeah. Okay. So Iraq. Iraq is a very large country. I'll show you the size of it in a minute. It's basically congratulations to Israel for signing a peace agreement with Morocco, or not signing yet. But if you remember, in Morocco, there was Morocco, and then there was Western Sahara area, which America recognized in order for Morocco to agree on having diplomatic relations with Israel. So without Western Sahara, Morocco and Iraq are quite the same size, just giving you something that we've already talked about. Now you can see Iraq is bordering Syria in orange. It's bordering Jordan in green. It has green left below Syria. Yeah, thank you. It has a very, very large, long border with Saudi Arabia. And then if you follow that line to the right, no, the other side, to the right, yeah, go down, no, other right.
Other.
Towards the Persian Gulf, Kim, on your right side, yeah. So you can see that it borders, and that go a little bit up. You have this little piece of purple thing, which is Kuwait, below Iran, okay? So you have Kuwait, and then above you have Iran, and at the top of Iraq, it also borders Turkey. So it's a very Arab land, and it has a small area that reaches the Persian Gulf. We'll talk about that in further slides. So you can move on with the slides. Just
no, it should move. It doesn't move.
Left click.
I know, maybe? But it doesn't work.
Yeah, it did. It just you moved two, but it's okay. I'll survive without the previous one. This one was just showing you the size of it. Never mind. Skip it. Let's.
Next.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So you can see this highlighted green area on the picture on the right, and this is supposed to show you the Fertile Crescent, which is a term we're using for these lands, the delta of the Nile River, which is very fertile in Egypt, and then Israel and Jordan and Syria and Iraq. So Kim, now do what you're doing, but the other way around. Just go with the green and you can see the crescent, exactly. These are the lands of the rivers, and this is the fertile part of the Eastern Middle East, if you'd like to look at it this way. But in the left picture, you can actually see that it has all these names, the Hittite Empire and the Mitanni state and Nineveh and Assyria and Babylonia. These are the lands of the Bible. These are the big empires of the Bible. And this is the cradle of civilization, if you'd like. This is where the story begins. And so we're really talking about Jews in Iraq. We're talking about a very, very long story of Jewish life. Please move on.
I hear you, but when I'm in this mode, it doesn't seem, I have no. Did it move? Okay.
Yep, it did. Just, okay, before we skip next, I'm just going to show you a few cities here. So you can see the capital, Baghdad, and then a little bit down and left, there is by a lake, there is a city called Karbala. Go left, Karbala, okay? And then you can see there are two rivers here. So Baghdad is on one river and Karbala is next to the other one. The one on the left is the Euphrates, the one on the right is the Tigris. This is Mesopotamia, the land of the two rivers. It's a Greek name, but these two rivers are what form the fertile land of Iraq. Iraq has mountains on the north. So you can see up on the Tigris River, go with the right side river, go all the way up to a city called Mosul. You've heard it name all the way up, all the way up. No, a little bit left. Mosul, Al-Mawsil, it says here. Next to Arbil, go left, the next big city on your left. It's up there. So we call it Mosul, but it's, yep, this one. So this one was, it came a lot of times in the news with ISIS and the fights, but Mosul is the land of Kurdistan. This is the capital this is the area of the Kurds, and this is where there are mountains in Iraq. Then we have the two rivers, which is the fertile land, and this is where most people settled. Go down, 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 all the way down to the bottom of the picture where you see a city called Al-Basra. So Al-Basra is where the two rivers meet and create one large river called Shat al-Arab, and this river will flow into the Persian Gulf. This is important because this was Iraq's importance in antiquity, and this will be Iraq's importance in modern times when naval trade routes will be developed from here. Karbala, which I mentioned, is an important city for the Shiites, and Baghdad is the capital for the last millennia. Please move on to the next slide. Okay, so a few facts about Iraq. Today it's a republic. There is a president and prime minister. They don't matter to our story, so I'm just going to skip. Population of Iraq today is 38, almost 39 millions. And the ethnicity in Iraq today is 80% Arabs and about 20% Kurdish. Maybe 1% is percent of all these lots of names you see there on the right: Turkmen, Yazidi, Shabak, Kabi, Assyrian, Romani, Circassian, Savian, all these. These are tiny, tiny groups of minorities. Maybe there were more at the beginning of the 20th century, but already in the 30s, when Iraq received its independence from the British, it was understood by a lot of minority groups that it's not great for them to live in Iraq, and so they left. So today, less than 1%. I want to point out the interesting fact that you do not see Jewish among this. Now, if this was a century ago, Jewish will definitely be there. But today we're talking about less than 100 Jews that are left in Iraq. And so it's not a number to count. Most of Iraqi people are Muslims. May they be Arabs or Kurds, they're all Muslim. And here's a surprising fact that a lot of people don't know, that Iraq has a majority of Shiite Muslim and not Sunni. Sunni is the majority of Muslims in the world, but Iraq, with its proximity to Iran, has a majority of Shiites. And part of why you've heard the name Iraq so many in the last few decades is because in Iraq, there's turmoil over the fact that for the last century, the Sunnis are ruling over the Shiites, and they don't love it. It's not just in the last century, actually, but this brings a lot of riots. There still is 1% of Christians, but once again, as you can see, there's no Jews, not when it comes to ethnicity and not when it comes to religion. The languages are everything that people speak. The official languages are Arabic and Kurdish, but if you're in a region where there are lots of Armenians, and that's the majority of the population, then Armenian is spoken, and that's okay by the state. By the way, the flag here that you see behind was changed along the 20th century, and this is what we have since the Republic times. Now, the last few figures at the bottom are the interesting, because this tells you that look at the fertility rate, 3.39, that's a lot. And you can see that the median age is only 21. So it has a young population. And just by seeing this, you can imagine that there is a lot of fertility rate, and this has to do usually with women's education, or generally with education of the society. And in Iraq, it may be surprising to me. It was surprising. It stands on 50%, which not in Morocco, not in Yemen. We didn't see these numbers. So why in Iraq? I guess it has to do with wars and the fact that people don't have access to education in the last 4 decades in Iraq. But also, while Iraq has its urban centers, there's also a scattered population in rural Iraq that doesn't have the access to this, to education so much. So these are just figures for us to be introduced with Iraq today, and we're moving to the Jewish story of Iraq. Yalla. Is Abraham the most famous Iraqi Jew? So we're going to talk today about Jews coming to Iraq. But what about the time when Jews came from Iraq? Is it only 1950 when there was the big migration of Iraqi Jews to Israel? So apparently no, and Abraham did come from Iraq. However, Abraham at that time is called Abram and not Abraham, and he's not even Jewish, right? He doesn't even know he's going to be Jewish. So Abram was a man that lived in Ur. I don't know if you see Ur. Kim, wait, let me move my thing. No, Ur is just below the word Babylon. It says you are. Can you see it? Wait,
I'm getting there.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, you're getting there. Excellent. You've just passed on it. So Ur is mentioned in the Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, it is Ur Kasdim. In English, it is translated to Ur of the Chaldeans. So in Genesis, in the book of Genesis, chapter 11, verse 28, it says, Terach took his son, Abram, his grandson Lot, etc., and his daughter-in-law Sarai, and they set out together from Ur of the Chaldeans for the land of Canaan. And you can see the arrows that follow the route of Abraham to Haran. Haran today is in Turkey. I'm proud to say that I visited Haran. I have pictures, and people tell me this is the house of Haran, and I'm like, yeah, this is the house of Abraham. And I'm like, come on, dude, this is a mud house. No way it survived for 2,000 years, 3,000 years, almost 4,000 years. But okay, if you tell me Haran is Haran, we know the area of Haran of antiquity. And then from there, Abraham goes to Eretz Canaan, the land of Israel. So Abraham made the reverse journey from what we're going to talk about today. But we know you're seeing here just all the routes that he went to Egypt and came back, but he never went back to Ur. So you can move to the next slide. And now we're asking ourselves, when did the Jews come to Babylon? So the Jews came to Babylon very early. And in a way, Babylon is the longest exile. It's the longest site of exile. Now, I know we mentioned Yemenite Jews, and maybe they came with the Queen of Sheba, and Ethiopia I also talked about it. And I know I said it about Tunisia and about Morocco, that there were maybe merchants that came there already in the 8th or 9th century BC. But we do not have evidence of that. And about the exile to Babylon, we have the stories from the Bible. And in a minute, I'll show you that we also have other evidences. So I'm just going to read to you. So I'm reading from, I don't know, you see me, right? Because I don't see myself now. But you see me? Yeah? You see me reading a book, holding a book? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So second book of Kings, chapter 24. And it says that Joachim was 18 years old when he became king and reigned 3 months in Jerusalem. And then it gives us his mother's name, and we get all this information about him. And then it says on verse 10, at that time, the troops of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon marched against Jerusalem, and the city came under siege. King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon advanced against the city while his troops were besieging it. Thereupon King Joachim of Judah, along with his mother and his courtiers, commanders, and officers, surrendered to the king of Babylon. The king of Babylon took him captive in the 8th year of his reign, And he carried off from Jerusalem all the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the royal palace. He stripped off all the golden decorations of the temple of the Lord. Da, 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 da. So this is happening at 597 BC. So we're talking about the 6th century BC. And then there's another story about the Babylonians make a new king. They place a new king, Zedekiah, but then Zedekiah doesn't understand that it's not great to deal with the Babylonians. And he will be led out of Jerusalem when he's blinded after he had to watch his children being killed in front of his face. And now there is a siege around Jerusalem. And eventually by 586 BC, that's the culmination of the big exile. They are being sent out of Judah and they go to Babylon, where they sit by the river and cry. So they're holding all their beautiful instruments, but they're crying. They're crying in longing for Jerusalem, in longing for Judah. And my question is, did they really cry? Because look what happens next. And how long did they cry? Kim, you can pass. So some say 539, some say 538 BC. There's something happens in the area. And now we have very few years after this big exile, we have a new empire rising, and this will be Persia, which is a little bit north from Babylon on that map I showed you before. And a king called Cyrus is now conquering the same area of Babylon. And he has no problem with all these people that went on exile. And he says, you can go back. Now, you're seeing here a cylinder, and it looks like there's some child, did lines on it. But this is actually in ancient Akkadian. Akkad was the kingdom before Assyria, and the language was still in use. So this is a cylinder that was found in 1879 in the area of the ruins of Babylon in Iraq of today. And on this cylinder, we have the name of Cyrus, and he speaks to the people about allowing them to go back to where they came from. And he praises himself as a very tolerant king and that he has no issues with their gods. Now, there's nowhere where he's talking about Judah. There's nothing. We didn't find this, okay? We've never found this part. But in the book of Ezra, in the 1st chapter, Ezra, the scribe, which lived 50 years after this declaration of Cyrus, he tells us about King Cyrus, and he tells us about this declaration that Cyrus gave. Now, what researchers believe is that just like we found this cylinder, maybe there were others, and maybe every community received a cylinder that spoke about their God. Now, in the book of Ezra, it seems like Cyrus literally speaks to the Lord Adonai, the God of the Jews, but we've never found anything like that. And since Ezra was the scribe, he has written it the way he liked. But we understand that really, as the Babylonians made many people go in exile, we understand that Cyrus came and gave all these people the right to go back. And my question is, did they all go back? Now, I don't see your faces. What is cuneiform? Can somebody tell me what is cuneiform? I don't know.
Type of script, a type of printing.
Or the Babylonian Talmud.
Yes, it's cuneiform. Yeah, yeah. I know what that is. Yes. Now, usually I ask, did they all come back? And so the answer is that you guys live in America and I live in the sovereign Jewish state. How come you don't live here in Israel? Now, I'm not going to give you the guilt complex because I don't have a problem with that. But reality is that when life is good, people don't move. And so maybe they cried on the rivers of Babylon when they were exiled, but 40 years later, they were happy in Babylon. And so when Cyrus gave his declaration and allows the Jews to come back, we understand that only 40,000 Jews actually returned, and that there were few waves. So there's Ezra, and then we have in the Bible the book of Nehemiah, and they tell us about these waves of people that went on the exile and came it's not the people that went on the exile, it's their descendants that come back. And we know that in 516 BC, they rebuilt the temple in Jerusalem. But generally, the majority of the Jews stayed in exile in Babylon. And this is important because you have to understand that this leadership of Babylon as being the leadership of the exile comes from that time. They were there and they were mass community and they continued Jewish life. Can you please move on to the next slide? No, this should not be the next slide. You skipped once. Oh, okay. It's this one. It's this one. So no, sorry, you were right. What we see here in this picture are tombs. So the picture on the right is just a more painted one. This is the tomb of Ezra. And it's also the picture on the left. Okay, so this is the modern day tomb of Ezra, the scribe, which some believe is buried in Jerusalem. Never found his tomb, but a lot of people, both Muslims and Jews, believe he's buried in Iraq. Below that, there's a picture there in the middle at the bottom. And this is the tomb of Prophet Ezekiel that speaks about the redemption and coming back from the exile. And on the left, that weird arch in the picture, that should be the tomb of Jonah, which was destroyed by ISIS in the last decade. So you don't really see anything there. I couldn't find pictures of it from before. For some reason, there was no picture. Okay, please move next. And this is what I wanted to tell you about. So these are not ginger biscuits. For some reason, every time I look at this, it looks to me like ginger biscuits, maybe because this is how my mom makes them. But these are actually tablets. And they're called Al-Yahudu tablets. Now, we don't know where they come from. These were found, so there's a personal connection. And my father's family is Bukharian. And Bukharian Jews come from where Uzbekistan is today. And my father's great uncle, his name was Shlomo Musayev. And he was an amazing man that died in 2015. And he was the biggest Judaica collector in the world. Judaica is all the artifacts that has to do with ritual, with Jewish rituals and Jewish life. But he was really interested in archaeology. And sometimes in the late 20th century, he showed few researchers from France these tablets. And they published research about them. And then it was realized that there are many, many tablets like this that are found in private collections around the world. And now they're all sitting in the Bible Lands Museum in Jerusalem. So I'm very pleased to say that it's my great uncle that started this research. And what are they? So not ginger biscuits, as I said. These are small plates of tin, made of tin. And on them is inscribed, so these are like judicial documents. And in all of them, there's the term Al-Yahudu. So we understand that Al-Yahudu has to do with the Jews, Yahud, and that these were from a place that we don't know exactly where it is, which was called Al-Yahudu. And this has to do with the life of the Jews that lived in this place. And that these come from 20 years after the exile to 100 years later. So from the 6th century to the 5th century, for 100 years, documents of Jewish life, talking about people that own things and people that change things and questions that they have here, a lot of judicial stuff. And this tells us a little bit about Jewish life in Babylon. It still needs to be researched more and more to give us the bits and pieces of day-to-day life in Babylon. You can move on to the next one. Yeah. Okay. So Jewish life. Now I see your faces. It's nice to see you all. I hope all is good. Now, so it's Chanukah today, and we have in the book of Maccabees, which is not part of the Bible. They do tell us about the Jews in Babylon. There are mentioning of the Jews in Babylon. But the next thing that will happen for the Jews in Babylon is that when the Second Temple is destroyed in the year 70 AD, there's again a big exile. And when you come to visit Israel, we speak about the Jews moving to the Galilee and building new communities in the Galilee. Really, a lot of them moved to Babylon. Now, these Jews that come now to Babylon already meet the community that is there. The community that is there was probably speaking ancient Hebrew, and now they start speaking Aramaic, which will become the leading language of Jewish life until the 7th century, when it will be in this area, it will turn to Arabic, Judeo-Arabic. But Jewish life, oh, no, please go back. I was just about to show something. So Jewish life was really thriving in Babylon. And there were Jewish communities that were just Jewish, and you can see them here. So there's Nahardea and Sura, and at the upper left, one letter is missing, but this would be Pumbedita. Now, I mentioned these names, Sura and Pumbedita, when I spoke about Morocco. And I said it in the 10th century, the rabbis of Fez had a constant pen-paling relationship with the Geonim of Sura and Pumbedita. Now, 10th century, there's a millennia between the destruction of the Second Temple and the 10th century. But this is just to show you that for a millennia, Jewish life are really thriving here. There's leadership, which is rabbinical leadership, and this will be the arch-exile, Resh Hagela. It's called in Arabic, like they have some weird pronunciation for this, Resh Gele, but Rosh Hagolah in Hebrew, head of the exile or arch-exile. And this is the center of Jewish religion, of Jewish culture, of Jewish thought. And it is here that the most important book, after the Bible and the Mishnah is written. This will be the Babylonian Talmud. Now you can move to the next slide. And so the people that write the Mishnah are the Tanaim, and then the people that comment on the Mishnah are called Amoraim. There are two groups of, and just to say, in case it's not obvious for everybody, so that the Mishnah and the Talmud are the codexes that encompass oral Jewish law, right? We have the written, the Bible, and then we have the Torah, and then we have the commentary about it. And everything that was done orally after the destruction of the Second Temple, there was an understanding that it needs to be written down, and that's when they come up with the Mishnah, sealed in the year 200, and then commenting about that, and everything that was in the comments will be written down around the year 500. There are two Talmuds. One was written in Tiberias, and we called it the Jerusalem Talmud. And the second one was written in Babylon. And the Babylonian Talmud is what people practice today. I don't know anybody that really followed the Jerusalem Talmud. It's the Babylonian Talmud that Jewish people follow. And then the people that come after the Amoraim, they're called Savoraim, and they will keep talking and fine-tuning the Talmud, and after them will come the Geonim. And this will be the situation until the 11th century, but it's not just the Talmud that they're dealing with, they're also dealing with day-to-day life. So please move on to the next slide. Green is the color of Islam. So every time you see green in my slides, you can know that it's something that has to do with Islam. So Iraq is really close to Saudi Arabia, and Mecca and Medina are in Saudi Arabia. So it is very very early that Iraq will be conquered. The year is 634. I remind you that Prophet Muhammad dies in 632. So within 2 years, all this vast land of Iraq is conquered. And when Islam really starts being growing in the area, the Jews of Arabia are expelled and they arrive to Iraq. So these are Jewish tribes that will go now to Iraq, and they will bring with them Arabic language. So starting this moment, Jews in the area of Babylon, by the way, Iraqi Jews, still some of them call themselves Babylonian Jews to our day. So I'm using the terms Babylon, Iraq interchangeably, although Iraq is the modern name. So now they're starting to use a Judeo-Arabic dialect, and the Arabic of the Jews of Iraq is very, very fine. It was always looked like as an elite dialect of Arabic in Iraq. Now, at the beginning, when Islam arrives, it's still life of the Jews are still very good, and Islam is expanding, and it will reach all the way to Spain. And now all these Jewish communities along the northern coast of the Mediterranean and in Spain are all under one empire, the Umaid dynasty, the Umaid Empire that conquers this region. It's a huge empire, but there's connection because they're all under the same ruler. And while there will be Jewish tribes that will go from this area along the Mediterranean and settle in all these different communities, there's still a thriving community in Iraq. And now there's all this pen-paling relationship, and people go and travel from one land to the other. And then in the 8th century, there is a change of dynasties in the Muslim world, from the Umaid to the Abbasid, or Abbasid, I think you say in English. And it's also during this time that the Caliph, I remind you that officially in Islam is not called Sultan, but it was the Caliph, the replacer of Muhammad. He chooses to establish a new city on the Tigris, and this will be Baghdad. So Baghdad is becoming the capital, and Jews are invited to live there on one hand. On the other hand, the Abbasid dynasty, the first few caliphs, it's very important for them. And I think it's the zeal of a new dynasty. And we spoke about it when we spoke about North Africa and also in Yemen, that every time that there's a new regime, so they become very zealot. And so they always want to humiliate the Jews. And then slowly and gradually they learn to use the skills of the Jews. But at the beginning, really, Jews were forced to wear a badge. They were not allowed to build new synagogues. Synagogues were confiscated. And they were really called state servants. And it's not just paying the jizya, the tax that you live now in a Muslim land. It's more than that. It's humiliation. It's Jews everybody can beat you, and just there's no punishment to humiliating a Jew. And so we start seeing the end of Jewish life, or not the end, but the going down of Jewish life in Iraq. Please move on. Which will bring us to the 11th century, where we have, it's not a climate change, it's a climate change. The climate change is not just emotional climate change. It's not just emotional and mental, it's actually physical. There is, I don't know what you call it, frost or freeze. Anyway, it's much colder. There's no food. And so in a land that is using the rivers, and there's a big desert around it, people just die of hunger. And we know that Jewish population is declining. People leave, go somewhere else, or just really die from hunger. And this is also the end of the Geonim period, and the Jewish center will shift to Europe. The next thing that will happen in Iraq, I'm not going to talk about it, is the Mongols arrive, and this whole end of Middle Ages in Iraq, we don't know much about Jewish life. In that time, there's always the Jewish doctor and the Jewish banker for the leader, but the Jewish community, all in all, is poor and miserable. The next big thing that happens, though, is the Ottoman Empire. So at first, and I remind you, they're all Muslims, but they're fighting, different forces are fighting. And so the first century, 16th to 17th century, is century of battles. It is hard for the Ottomans to conquer all of Iraq. There are Bedouin tribes that fight against them. There's Shiites that fight against them. But eventually, by the 17th century, still things start to settle down. And we know that the Barzani family rabbis lead the community. We have evidences about that. We have the writings. And then in the 18th century, that family of rabbis, I guess they fall to the pandemic that happened in 1743, and now there's no spiritual leadership. And what the Jewish community does, because they're all under the Ottoman Empire, so they invite rabbis from Aleppo. Aleppo is in Syria, also under the Ottoman rule, and they invite them to be the rabbis of the community in Iraq. And what this does is that those rabbis that come from Aleppo are actually Megorashim. They were expelled from Spain. They're descendants of those that were expelled from Spain. So they bring wisdom, Nusach Sfarad. And so from the 18th century on, the Iraqi Jews are Sephardi Jews. Remember our original question? Are they Mizrahi or are they Sephardi? So Iraqi Jews are both. Iraq is in the east, which means Mizrach. So they're both Mizrahiim, but they're also Sephardi since the 18th century. Prior to that, they had a more Persian influence. We'll talk about Persian Jews in our next session, so not this time. So from now on, there's a high Sephardi influence on the community. Now it gets more interesting in the 19th century. You were good. I'll take a sip.
Sometimes I touch something and it skips without me to do that.
Yeah. So the 19th century, Tanzimat, you can see that there is the third word over there, Tanzimat. Tanzimat means reforms, so it's kind of following the reforms. I was just translating the word. The Jews are recognized as a separate millet. So the Ottoman Empire had its heyday and it had its declining time. And of course, at the beginning, it was a very centralized empire. It was always better for the Jews. But slowly and gradually, as there were more local rulers that governed the different areas, Jews used to suffer because they used to be exploited by these local tax collectors. And then in the 19th century, there's a growing interest of the European powers in what they used to call the sick men on the Bosphorus, because the Sultan's palace in Istanbul, the head of the Ottoman Empire, was on the Bosphorus. And they look at the Ottoman Empire and they look at it as this huge cake, and all the different European powers want to have pieces of that cake, but they want to get the larger piece, and that their neighbor country won't get that large piece instead of them. So along the 19th century, they all felt comfortable in just supporting the existence of the Ottoman Empire. They didn't want Russia to interfere. They didn't want Germany to interfere. And they had all their interests. And but they did encourage the Ottoman Empire to make reforms. And this is the time of enlightenment. And so under this Tanzimat, Jews are recognized as a separate Edda, as a separate community that they have. Now they're allowed to have their education and judicial and everything that has to do with their religion can be run by themselves. And it's good for the Jews. And it also opens connection of the Jews to study in Istanbul. So we start seeing, I didn't say where the Jews lived in Iraq, so I'm going to say it next. But what we see is that there's a fast wave of urbanization for the Jews in the 19th century. So generally, the Jews of Iraq would really live in Baghdad, Mosul, and Basra, and we see opening to modern ideas. So if until that time there were very, very few Jews that were bankers of the Ottoman Empire or of the Ottoman ruler of Iraq, now we start seeing Jewish young men go to study in Istanbul, in Switzerland, in other universities. Iraq itself does not have universities yet. And in 1864, we see the Alliance Française arriving in Iraq. Now, I remind you, Alliance Française is an organization that was started by French Jews. Alliance Française, it basically means the French alliance, but it was an organization of French Jews that believe that they bring the light to their brethren Jews in all these undeveloped countries. And they brought schools that had secular ideas with them. Now, the interesting thing is that in Iraq, they're invited to come. So in other places, they were not invited to come. They came because the French came. Here, there's no French regime, but they are invited by the Jewish community to come and open schools. And they opened the first school in 1864. They will open separate schools for boys and girls. But this is a beginning of modernization by the community itself. It also teaches us that there is a gap between the spiritual leadership, the rabbis, and the people on the streets, the Jews that really want to get professions that has to do with modern days. In Iraq, just like all of our Arab countries so far, the Jews were little tradesmen, and they were always the silversmiths and the goldsmiths and the money changers and the money lenders, traditional profession of the Jews. But in Iraq, we'll see a change in the end of the 19th century. And now that has to do with Jewish clerks that start serving, and in taxation and in the trade, they'll grow bigger. In 1869, the Suez Canal is opened. And in Europe, there is a movement to naval trading. Now, if at first there was trade route, part of the Silk route in northern Iraq. Now they moved to South Iraq, and in a minute we'll see a picture of that. Just showing you on the left that because of this naval trade, Iraqi Jewish families moved to India. And this is the Sasson family, that they have a very big trade house in Mumbai and Calcutta. And you can see here, yeah, move, Kim, it's okay. Yeah, so you can see Suez Canal, and if you go down, you see Bab el-Mandab, and then a little bit up of that, you see Hormuz. So where you see Hormuz, yeah, a little left of that, a little left, there's a thing that reaches the Shatt el-Arab River. Exactly. This is where Iraq ends, and this is where the rivers come in. So Basra, move to the next slide, please. Basra is at the bottom, is just at the bottom of your picture, yeah? So Basra is at the bottom where the rivers meet together, and this will become a big city that a lot of Jews will start living here, because from here there will be boats going to India. And since the British have all this development of naval routes, so India is very important. And that's why also there is a British influence on Iraq, because of the connection with India, which was already under British rule. Let's move on. Oh, by the way, sorry, I said, yeah, never mind. I said that the Jews lived in cities. Okay. Now we move to the 20th century, and the Ottomans are still there, but very soon there's going to be a world war. And in that world war, the vast Ottoman Empire is going to collapse. And all the pieces of the cake are being eaten by the different European powers, and they have their interests. So on the left picture, you can see the arrival of the British in 1970 to Baghdad. They already conquered Basra in 1914, but it took them longer time to make it to Baghdad. And what happens is that after World War I, while they have all these interests in the Middle East, they also have to pay the debt of the Emir Hussein, which was the man who collaborated with Lawrence of Arabia and gave this area of the Middle East to the British. And as a result, his sons are getting states to be monarchs of. So King Faisal I was at first the king of Syria, but then in the end of agreements of World War I, Syria went to the French, and he was an ally of the British. So the British said, no, and he was basically kicked out of Syria, and they placed him as the king of Iraq. So now this is King Faisal, and look what a handsome man he is. And he will rule Iraq from 1921 till 1932. Let's move on to the next slide.
Is the Jordan that they talk about is the Hashemite kingdom? Does that
not Hashmonite, Hashemite? Yes. So King Hussein, not king. Today is the King Abdallah of Jordan. His great grandfather was a brother of King Faisal, and the family that runs Saudi Arabia today are part of that agreement. They're all Hashemites. Okay, but they tried to rule other countries and they didn't quite accept them. Now I'm just showing you these pictures that King Faisal on the right side is visiting a school, a Jewish school in Iraq. That's the picture on the right. Can anybody recognize on the picture on the left, he's on the right side in the picture of the left. And then does anybody know who this guy is on his left?
Weitzman?
Looks like Chaim Weitzman.
Amazing. You're right. In 1918, Faisal and Weitzman met. And I'm just going to read you. I'm translating from my Hebrew. It's from my phone. He says, and Weitzman wrote about him. He says, wow, he's a leader. He's quite intelligent and a very honest man, very, very handsome. And he's expecting great results from the cooperation with the Jews. So Faisal agreed to the Balfour Declaration. He later on said he didn't, but he agreed to the Balfour Declaration. He saw the Jews as a good thing that's happening to Palestine. He really looked down at Palestinian Arabs. He didn't even consider them to be Arabs. And he was willing to do great things with the Zionists. But, well, you know, history goes in other ways. And Chaim Weitzman kind of thanks to Ben Gurion, did not become an influential man in the state, in the Jewish state, but Ben Gurion kind of shrunk his size. So, and I hope this is not shocking to any of you. This is another topic I'm interested in. We can talk about it some other time. So this is King Faisal, and King Faisal, he will be the leader of Iraq for the next decade. Is kind of a dummy king under the British, but he's also doing things for the Iraqi people. It was great time for the Jews because he believed in Jewish intelligence, and this is the time when Jewish man will be the first minister of finance, and Yitzhak Sasson, that minister of finance, will be the one that really establishes modern Iraqi economy. And another man called Abraham al-Kabiri will be the man that will lead one coin in Iraq, unified coin all over Iraq, and his influence is still felt to our day. So Faisal opened his arms to allow Jews to come into the leadership, and also for the British. Look, the British, they use the minorities because the minorities are collaborating with them. It reached a point where in 1920, the Jews of Iraq asked for British citizenship. There's such collaboration between the Iraqis, the British authorities and the Jews, which is obviously not something that is liked by the local Arabs. But for the Jews, this era from 1917 until 1932 is the golden era of the Jews in Iraq. Let's move on to the next slide.
I'm working on it.
I believe you. Just showing you some, look at these pictures. Look how you can see the wealth of these families. Sorry, they're sitting in their sukkah. My writing over there is not correct, but just move on. I just wanted you to see people are beautifully dressed. This is not, they look almost Europeans. Moving on. There's one more picture of this. Okay, never mind. So independent Iraq. So the next thing that will happen is that Iraq will receive independence from Britain. So the British mandate of Iraq is a very short one, and in a way didn't influence enough if you're asking me. And the next thing that will happen is a slow going downhill for the Jews in Iraq. And that has to do with four things. So first of all, in independent Iraq, there's a majority, which are Shiites, and Shiites and Sunnis don't look the same as Jews. For the Shiites, Jews they're the slaves. Like, you can't let them just be. And the fact that they're all over the place, in especially Baghdad, the majority of the Jews lived in Baghdad, and they were, and unlike communities in Morocco and Yemen, where I said that everybody was poor and there was a small group of wealthy people, in Iraq in the 30s, there is a very large community which is wealthy, which people are going to amazing schools, and they're moving out of the Jewish community and they're living within their brothers Muslims because they want to have large houses. There were Jewish palaces. Faisal bought a Jewish home to be his palace. So you can understand what wealth I'm talking about. And the Shiite don't love this Jewish influence in the community in Iraq. Also, in the 30s, we see a rise of Arab nationalism. So if under the Ottoman Empire, they were all Muslim, so it was called Pan-Islam. Now we see Pan-Arabism. And this strengthening of Arab identity is alienating the Jews. We're the Arabs, and they take in the Christians, but the Jews, they don't take in. They see them as those that collaborated with the British. And then the third thing that really happens in the 30s is the rise of fascism and anti-Semitism. There was a German representative in Baghdad that bought the largest, most popular journal in Iraq, Al-Alam al-Arabi, the Arab World, and in it he publishes Mein Kampf. He translates it to Arabic, and it's Nazi propaganda is coming all over the place. There's a Futua, which is a militarized youth organization that is established, just like fascist Italy. And in this time, all the teachers and all the students have to go to this youth organization. So the picture on the right over there at the top is a schoolmaster, a Jewish schoolmaster that has to be trained in this fascist organization and be part of this organization where his ideology is totally not there. The four things that influence is the Israeli-Arab conflict. Iraq, unlike any other Arab country, does not just speak about it, but is actually intervening with it. Can you move on to the next slide? So this guy, Fawzi al-Kaukji, was a Lebanese Jew. Please move one back. Yeah, never mind. Okay, never mind. Just leave it, stay here. Anyway, okay, good. Fawzi al-Kaukji was born in Lebanon, but comes to Iraq, organizes a military, and he come to participate in the 1936 Arab revolt, Palestinian revolt against the British. There's a strike and he makes terror organization. The British kick him out of Israel. He goes back to Iraq. In 1948, he will come again with a unit of Iraqi volunteers to participate in the 1948 war in Israel. Now we know that the countries that surround Israel fought against Israel, but Iraq does not have a border with Israel. Iraq is on the other side of Jordan. There's a huge desert between us and them, and yet they felt compelled to participate in this war. And he, Fawzi al-Kaukji, was a total anti-Semit. He was anti-Semit. Yeah, he went to Berlin. He met with Hitler. He was a pro-Nazi and believer that all Jews should be extinct. And he led Iraq, although he was not Iraqi, he was funded by the Iraqi regime to lead and command the Iraqi forces in Israel. They lost the battle. He will die much later in 1977. But he got his money from Iraq. So I think it's interesting to see that in Iraq, there was a real, and it influenced the Jewish life in Iraq. People will be murdered because of violence in Israel, and things are going on turmoil. And the big turmoil point will be 1941. We're running Kim. And this is called the Farhud. Farhud could be called as pogrom. It happens in June 1st and 2nd, 1941. On the left side, you can see the Muslims that come out of the mosque with the call to kill the Jews. And on the right side, you can see a man that is leaning on the mass grave that was built for those Jews that were killed in the Farhud. You can move to the next slide. 180 Jews die in this pogrom. It has to do with an internal coup in Iraq, but the ones that seize power are very, very pro-Nazi. I remind you, these are the wars of these are the years of World War II. The British don't let them stay, but the mass is already, driven crazy, and there's a lot of anti-Jewish propaganda. Please move on to the next one. And we hear a testimony that this family lived in a neighborhood which was not part of the Jewish community. They lived in a Muslim neighborhood, and so we were mostly cut off from the center of the Jewish community. And our Muslim neighbors became our friends. It was because of one Muslim neighbor, in fact, that we survived the Farhud. We had no weapons to defend ourselves and were utterly helpless. We put furniture up against the doors and window to prevent the rioters from breaking in. Then Colonel Arif's wife came rushing out of her house with a grenade and a pistol and shouted at the rioters, "If you don't leave, I will explode this grenade right here." Her husband was apparently not at home, and she had either been instructed by him to defend us or decided on her own to help. They dispersed, and that was that. She saved our lives. A lot of Jews did not have this positive experience during the Farhud to see their Muslim neighbors taking care of them. And the Iraqi Jews get a stipend from the state. It's they're not recognized as Holocaust survivors, but it does go under the compensation that the state of Israel is given for people that survived the Holocaust. It's maybe political, but that's the reality. Now the Farhud, please move on. Farhud, I'm running because I know we started late and I do want to finish Iraq today, but the Farhud is a pivoting point, and now they understand they need to leave, but it will take time. Like people maybe start thinking about leaving. So at first, there's illegal immigration through Iran. People cross the border by foot through the mountains, and then they take airplanes to go to Israel or Cyprus, and from Cyprus to Israel. Then the leader, in 1948, there's the war in Israel, and the situation of the Jews in Iraq is not great because of that. And they're even called, the chief rabbi of Iraq is called to make an anti-Zionist declaration, which, by the way, he does this because he needs to take care of the community, but the younger people in the community don't love that he did it. There's a Zionist clandestine force that is living and kicking in Iraq, and this will alienate the spiritual Jewish leadership from the younger generation, which was already secular. In 1949, this guy on the right, Shafiq Ades, who was a very connected businessman, is being hanged. They say he sold guns to the Israeli military, and once again, a lot of Jews understand that if he was hanged, what's going to happen to us? And so by March 1950, there's discussions between the Jewish state and the Iraqi leadership. And there's a suggestion for a population exchange that the Jews of Iraq will leave and the Palestinian Arabs will come. This does not materialize, but interesting idea. And then the Iraqi government in March 9, 1950 passes a law that Jews of Iraq are no longer citizens. And within a year, they have to leave. And now they were only allowed to leave with $140 and 66 pounds of weight and no jewelry. But how is this going to be organized? You can move to the next slide. So I will tell you, meanwhile, that David Ben-Gurion did not want the Iraqi Jews at first. He said, wait, they're going to close the iron screen on Romania and Czechia and all this area and Czechoslovakia. We have to get the Jews of Europe first. But there was a feeling that this was a time to bring the Jews of Iraq. And they had pamphlets saying, "Oh Zion, flee, daughter of Babylon." And then it said, "Jews, Israel is calling you, come out of Babylon." And when the leader of Iraq at that time, Rashid Ali, agreed to this operation, which Israel called Operation Ezra and Nehemiah, these were the people that led the Jews out of Babylon in the return to Zion, then they thought they were talking about 10,000s. They didn't realize what was going to happen, but Jews stood in thousands day after day to register for immigration. And you can see the pictures that they're coming in the airplane. So it will be Near East aircrafts that will be taking them from Iraq to Cyprus and from Cyprus to Lod in Israel. And they say that there was a flight every 3 hours, and like people were really running away. And within 9 months, 118,000, some say 125, never mind, 120,000 Iraqi Jews are leaving Iraq. They're leaving all their property behind, they're leaving their citizenship behind, and they come to Israel. And it's time to say that unlike the other communities we spoke about, I think the Iraqi Jewry was looked, because they were really educated when they came to Israel and people, interviewed them, what's your profession? 25% of the immigrants had they were free professions. They were lawyers, they were doctors, they were bankers. They were not just this peddler on the road. They were not just small merchants. And so very quickly, they were not sent to these transit camps, or they were sent there for a very short time. But in Israel, there's a city very close to Tel Aviv called Ramat Gan, and this is like the Iraqi city. And like we say every accountant in Israel is Iraqi, even today. So this was an educated immigration, and they spoke, in the 20th century, they spoke Arabic, but they knew Hebrew because of Zionism. They knew Hebrew from religious studies, and then they knew very fine Hebrew from Zionist and from secular schools. So Iraqi Jews, when they came to Israel, that's another part of making their life easier for immigration. They actually spoke very good Hebrew. And Iraqi Jews been looked at like they don't have this inferiority complex that many other Mizrahiim or Sephardic Jews that came to Israel have. Iraqi Jews is looked as the elite of the Arab countries' immigration. Now we have like I know 5 minutes, but I want to finish Iraq today, so I want us to move on. I will say that there were about 10,000 Jews that stayed in Iraq, and they moved one, yeah, and that the last Jew of Iraq maybe came to Israel like 2 years ago. I may send it to Kim. I found it on YouTube. It's a sad movie about this guy that he comes to Israel in like 2018, and he's an Arab Jew. He's so Arab that the Jews here don't accept him, and it's sad. So maybe I'll send it to Kim. It's a sad story, in my opinion, but it just shows you that in Iraq, people in Morocco, people maybe chose to stay because their parents were there, but in Iraq, people chose to stay because there's so much wealth they wanted to protect. And up until 1963, Jews of Iraq could have their property, and then they slowly left to London or to America. They didn't really come to Israel. But after 1963, things got really bad for Iraqi Jews, and there was another trickle of immigration in the 70s and then in the 2000s. So it's Chanukah. And while I really want you to see the one slide of Iraqi food, because I hope you all know about kubeh, and if you don't, then you should, definitely on your next visit to Israel, but you should look for kubeh online. It's the most delicious Iraqi soup, Jewish Iraqi soup. I want to talk for a second about Chanukah. So in Iraq, there was a tradition of Chanukias, like the one you see on the left here. And the one at the bottom, so you can see the khamsa. We talked about the khamsa in Morocco, right? So it's the hand for protection, but you can also see that there's olive oil in these little cups over there. So these are not for candles. This is for olive oil and the wick, I think you say it. But I want you to look at the menorah or Chanukiah has at the back of it, it has a back, and at the top of it, you can see a crescent. And on top of the crescent, there's something. Now, we believe that it was actually a Star of David, that under independent Iraq, it was turned into just a triangle, because it wasn't nice to show that because in that time, the Star of David becomes just an Israeli and a Jewish symbol, while historically it was a cosmic sign that was also used by the Muslims. I just realized, okay, this other menorah is, weird in how it looks. Anyways, so just this is a closer look at this menorah. Look how beautiful it is. These are made from copper. Later on, they will be made by silver, which tells us that Jews are becoming wealthier. Go back one slide. And we don't know why, but in Iraq, it was popular suddenly in the 30s and the 40s of the 20th century. So there would be this menorah on the right side, which is kind of circular, which it's against the law of how to make Chanukiah, but for some reason the rabbi said it works. I've never seen a menorah like this in my life that goes around like this, but this was a style of Iraqi menorahs. You can find them today on auction. They cost a lot of money because there's not so many of them, but it's an Iraqi style of Chanukiahs. Okay, let's just finish with, go down. Yeah, with Iraqi food, to have something, it's my midnight now. I'm not gonna eat, but you can do it. And so you can see at the bottom right, at the bottom left, and in the middle of the picture, it's all, it's kubeh, which you can make. It's semolina dough surrounding different kinds of meat, and it's very popular. And if you've ever eaten in Machne Yehuda market, in the Azura restaurant, or Rachmo, or Mordech, then it's something to come back to. So I just wanted to finish with this happy picture, because I think the story of Iraqi Jews, I found it super interesting. I know we told a lot of history today, because really I wanted to make just one lesson about Iraq, but I feel like, Iraqi Jewry is really the exile. And for you and for me, we think about European Jews, but look how much more history there is in the East and among Sephardi Jews. And I'm so happy that you are willing to learn this and to open yourself to the fact that, while the white person may look, Joyce, I'm going to let you speak. While the white person may look like it's supreme, the story is much bigger, and there's much to learn about that.
Multicolored and cultural. And
Yes.
to me, it was just the idea of, crying by the river of Babylon and the Babylonian Talmud, the magic of this stuff. I'm sorry, Joyce.
Yeah, Joyce, you had a question or something you wanted to say. Unmute yourself.
Not yet. There you go.
Okay. So did you say one of the names of the families was Sassoon?
Yes, Sassoon is a
Okay.
very, very famous Iraqi and Iraqi Hindi.
And Hong Kong and India, and I visited in India and Hong Kong and
Yeah.
Shanghai, everywhere.
Yes, everywhere. Very, very famous family of traders. Yes. Mhm.
And there's
Any other question?
did the person who wanted to know-
Marilyn, did you want to ask something, or are you just touching your iPad?
Marilyn Schwartz, can I say something?
Please.
In Fort Lauderdale, there was a bunch of stores making curtains and draperies. The name was Sultana, and they were Jews from Iraq. And I met her at a meeting. She told me that when the Jews left Iraq, they left over $2 billion worth of
Yeah.
capital, factories, businesses, and it was
Yeah.
interesting meeting her. But they were
So-
right in Fort Lauderdale.
So there's in the last, I will say, decade and a bit more, there's, when we deal about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, so people say, don't forget that Jews had to leave home without their property. And while you talk about, let the Palestinians go back to their communities, are you going to allow the Jews to go back to their communities and to open up their businesses? So they say, let's look at it as equal, because if you look at the numbers of Jews that left Arab lands, it kind of equals the number of Palestinians that were, how they present it, exiled from their homeland. And when you look at about the property, then the property of the Jews is much more than what the Palestinians had here, simply because the Palestinian population in Israel by the 1940s was mostly shepherds and peasants, and just this was the reality of their life. There were some super wealthy Palestinians that lived in Jerusalem. There were some magnificent buildings that they left behind. But can you really compare it when you think about the wealthy Jews of Iraq and Persia and Egypt and Tunisia and Morocco? So can you really compare the wealth to what was lost by them? Is this going to be if this will bring everybody to be happy on that the Palestinians don't ask to go back and that the Jews don't ask to go back, then I think we're on a good solution. But I'm not sure that we're getting there. And anyways, that's a different story.
Hand up, but her video off.
What?
Betsy has her hand raised, but her video off. So I'm not sure if that.
Okay. I'm here.
Hi, Betsy.
Hi. I wanted to ask about the swap that never took place. What was it? Why didn't it take place? The swap?
It didn't take place because the Iraqi government didn't really want to have 100,000 Palestinian refugees that will come very poor, and they will have to deal with them. Is this the swap you meant? The population swap?
Yes.
So it was.
And
it
whose
was
idea was it?
I'm sorry?
Who proposed that solution?
It was, so I think it was like a British suggestion.
Oh,
And yeah, nobody really took it seriously.
thank you.
It didn't really reach serious negotiations. And while we may look at Palestinians as Arabs and they can go live in Kuwait and they can go live in Iraq, for the Palestinians, Palestine is their homeland, and the fact that they're Arab ethnically does not mean that they belong in Iraq. And so I can tell you that from their side, this is not a valid option.
Thank
While
you.
the Jews always yearned for Jerusalem, I don't know that I know for sure that the Palestinians don't have anything with Iraq or Kuwait or Saudi.
Just wanted to say you gave us a great history lesson. Thank you.
The
Thank you.
The contact. Sherry Rothschild has her hand up before we sign off.
I just wanted to share a book about what you're talking about. This was a woman, Lynn Julius. Have you heard of her?
No.
She wrote this book about her family, and then she researched and did a whole history of the uprooting of the Mizrahi, as she referred to it, Jews of the
Arab land.
Arab lands. Yeah.
Yes, it's a more developing research and like story that people are open to hear now, but I don't know that people were so open to it 20 years ago. So this,
Right,
I think
she says
probably
that
the
in the
last
book,
decade.
too.
Yeah. There's
Right.
there's an understanding that Jews can also talk about being uprooted and not just the Palestinian story.
Thank you. As a history teacher, I was just enthralled with your talk today.
Thank you. I'm sorry if there were no movies today and no music. There's actually excellent music, but it was just, I felt like with our time, I need to give you the story of this land.
And if we have to add one more week, I think we could suffer through another week.
Well, I skipped last week, so I'm happy to give you
So
another week.
maybe we'll have maybe we'll do a makeup class over Christmas, because we didn't have anything scheduled for next.
Right, Christmas and the next week. So
And the
you tell me.
So maybe we'll add a class. Let's decide right now. Who wants to do a makeup class next week when we have nothing else to do?
Wait, question? Okay. Are we
And
talking?
are you available, because you didn't mark it on your schedule, and Christmas in Israel might not be the
Okay.
open time that it is for us.
No, the question is, can we do the 30th instead of the 23rd?
I would love to.
Yeah, we could do the 30th instead of the 23rd. If it's hard to ask, like a Zoom group.
Okay.
Mhm.
Okay.
Take
So
it